Chapter 13. A Desperate Flight. Exon smirked, his voice full of the purring malice they remembered. "So, you was all boating down the river, was ye, me hearties? Fancy that now." His green, sinister gaze roved over them, each in turn, until it fell on Guy. The good eye flickered in a wink that might have been jolly, but for the depths of evil that lay behind it. "And there's young Guy with you too," the oily tones continued. "As bold a lad as ever stepped, though a sight too nosy in his ways for some folks' taste. You was with 'em coming downstream as well, was you, eh?" Guy said nothing. He was furious at the trap they had fallen into so stupidly. To think they had evaded the Indians with such good fortune, only to be caught by a crew of gallows birds like these. "Well, speak up, sonny," said the old scoundrel, "or perhaps I'll find a way to make ye." At once Guy's memory went back to the day in the lane, when the King's dragoons had questioned him in the pouring rain. The corporal had used almost exactly the same threat. Sullen with anger, he could hardly get out the words as he rasped, "Aye, I was coming downstream as well." Exon's snarling grin widened. Now, he taunted. "Who do you think's going to be bubbled by a yarn like that? You mean to try and gammon us that you was all on a nice little pleasure trip, back to where the branding irons and the lash is waiting for you? Have some sense." "It's true," Guy jerked out. "The Indians are coming. They'll be here any minute, and you sit there rattling as if nothing mattered. Unless we stir ourselves, we'll all be killed." For the first time a spark of genuine doubt showed in the grey-haired rascal's face, but Exon cast it from him, holding fast to his disbelief. "Yah, tell that to the Indians when they come," he said. "Upstream was the way you came, me fine bullies, on the run from the settlement, same as us. Maybe you even followed us to try and grab the swag." "You fool," this time it was Alistair who addressed him. "You have been told the truth. As Guy says, if we stay here, you will find it out to your cost." "That's nothing but fact," Ebbin put in. "Them copper-skinned varmints'll scalp the lot of us, if we don't get. We ain't fooling." Exon got up. Now at least he was partly convinced. "Well, if that's the case, we'll take your kind advice." He chuckled again. "We'll take your boat too, while we're about it, and that fine long gun. Step back there, while your old China picks up the shooter." Under the threat of the pistol, they were forced to give way. None of them dared risk a movement. Their weapons were at their feet, where they had dropped them, and they were defenceless. Exon picked up the rifle with the powder horn and bullet pouch, inspecting them. He sniffed. "These bullets is plaguey small. Blister me if they ain't," he reproached Eben Willett, as if the trapper had played him a dirty turn. "They won't fit the short barker. But never mind, we'll be provided for with the long gun." Unhurriedly the three villains picked up their gear and got ready to leave. Exon sent the flash call to find the canoe. As it was now almost daylight, they did not take long, and Smeaton came back with a delighted grin. "It's there, Will. A good long craft, and full of their stuff. They've even got food of a kind." "Food?" The outlaw's faces mirrored Smeaton's grin. "That's a real stroke of luck. Blow me tight if it ain't." Exon made them a mocking bow. "Much obliged, me old sprigs. We've fared but poorly since we left Mr. Blinkin' Holly's luxurious establishment." Last of all, they took the saddlebags. These were very heavy, but Gil made light of hefting them across his massive shoulders, though two ordinary men would have staggered under their weight. "Come on, Will," the pugilist growled shortly. Be you going to stop here all day and magging with them? Right you are, old heart of oak. His leader tapped the pistol meaningly as he turned to the men who regarded him in bitter silence. Don't try to follow any more, lads, or it'll be the worse for ye, understand? Full of despair and anger, they watched the ruffians manoeuvre the canoe clumsily out into the current. At one moment they hoped it would tip over, so awkward were its new owners, but it righted itself after rocking alarmingly. Flailing the water with the paddles, the robbers put its head upstream and made some headway in a crab-like manner. They were not skilful. Watching them go, Eben laughed harshly. They wouldn't be told, he remarked. Now they're heading straight to their deaths. Holly's gold'll buy 'em nothing from the Cherokees. Exon turned to wave jauntily, shouting, "Remember us to the Indians when you meet 'em." "You'll meet them before we will," Guy cried. "Perhaps you'll wish you'd listened to what we said." The only reply was a catcall of derision. As it died, Alistair sighed and shrugged his shoulders. "Well, that ends our chances of reaching the settlements, I suppose." "Why?" Guy objected stoutly. The setback joined with the obstinacy that was part of his nature to rouse his courage. After all they had come through, he could not bear to think that they were beaten. "We can still run." "That is true," Alistair perked up. "At any rate, there is no use staying here." "Good boys," Eben let out a soft laugh. It was a grim sound. "We've lost all our gear, but that means we've less to carry. Let's get going before them red varmints catch up with us." Eben was right. All they had left were their knives, and Alistair's long rapier, if one accepted Eben's hatchet. Eben led the way into the brush. He made the pace fast, and they kept up with him. Knowing they dared not loiter, a fierce urgency sent them forward. From now on their sole chance of success, and even of staying alive, lay in their heels. It was bad country to move through quickly. They followed the river bank as far as they could, because that was the easiest way. The woods grew close and wild, right down to the shore. The stands of big timber were choked with thickets of young oaks and spruce wherever there was space. Every now and then they came to windfalls, where storms had blown down great rows of trees. These lay in huge tangled heaps, the fallen logs interlacing in a snarl of ugly branches. Even a snake would have had trouble getting through some of them. These were serious obstacles, which had to be skirted or climbed over, a process which took valuable time. They forged on as best they could, always with the knowledge of the dread savages behind them. By and by the sun came up, lifting the heavy dew off the leaves and drying their wet clothes, which were soaked from pushing through the forest. Later it brought a warmth that added to their troubles. Thin and gaunt as they were, soon all of them were panting and damp again with perspiration. Eben knew his way like a homing bird, going forward with no hesitation through the trackless wilderness. They did not trouble to hide their sign. There was no time, and in any case, it would probably have been useless. Badly winded, they threw themselves down for a short rest at midday. Guy sprawled full length on the bank of moist dark mould, and let his chest heave madly, while he got his breath. This was worse even than the outward run, when he was flying from the plantation with the Highlanders. "How far to go now?" panted Alistair. Eben grunted. He lay on his back, and his ribs were pumping under the soiled buckskin of his hunting shirt. Beads of sweat glistened on his brown face. "'Bout a dozen miles, I reckon," he replied, gasping. "With luck, we'd ought to be there in 2-3 hours. And the savages? Where are they, do you fancy?" "Close behind. Might even be some in front, for all we can tell. The Catawbas are in on this, don't forget. They might have sent a war party from the south, and got ahead of the Cherokees." "Catawbas?" Guy said. "I thought they were a friendly nation." Eben sat up and began to massage the muscles in his calves and thighs. The strain of the pace had told even on his iron frame. "The Cherokees were supposed to be friendly too," he observed with a harsh grin. But their sentiments has altered. Guess the French have been working on 'em, with presents and promises of loot. The Cherokee and the Catawba, do you say? Alice mused. That sounds awful like a full-scale invasion. Sure, I told you that before, snapped Eben. I saw the wampum back in the Cherokee town before I sneaked out. This is no footling little raid after a few scalps. I tell you, there's thousands of 'em on the trail down here. He rose to his feet. We got no time to lay around chewing the fat. Let's get along. They had left the river bank some way behind, as it made a big detour, and Eben said it was quicker to cut across country. Now they breasted a big rise, covered like all the rest of the ground with dense undergrowth and saplings. Struggling desperately, they had to plough through it and fight their way uphill against the matted brushwood. It took them an hour to reach the top. On the crest they kept hidden and looked forward. From here they got a tremendous view of the land in front. It sank, stretching in a carpet of trees which rolled green and unbroken for miles. Below them the river glinted in a ribbon of shimmering silver among the trees. That's Foxley's place. Eben pointed. Far off, Guy saw a thin waver of smoke, which threaded upward out of the timber. Straining his eyes, he could just make out a dark spot, which looked like a building, a long way down the river. His spirits rose. Thank goodness we're in sight of it anyhow, he said fervently. A big weight seemed to lift off his shoulders. It won't take long to get there. He was about to get up and start forward, but Eben pulled him down quickly. Not so fast. The trapper's voice was a barely audible mutter. Look down there. This time Eben's finger indicated a narrow game trail which ran through the thick woods only 100 yards below their hiding place. Guy stared, and his heart jumped up into his throat. A long shadow moved down the path silently. 2 or 3 seconds passed before he realised that it was composed entirely of men, gliding along in swift file, their painted coppery bodies blending with the foliage, until they seemed to be part of the woods behind them. Indians, he whispered. Scores of them.